It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast. Here we are once again covering all of your real estate property news. We do it every morning, 7 days a week, and you can catch us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Amazon. Well, today is a very tough day. The stragglers, if today is finally the day that you come back from your holiday on this Monday morning, January the 20th, it has come to an end. How very sad. Good luck with this week, because it is going to be a tough one. Many people, of course, opting to come back tomorrow on Tuesday, so they've got a bit of a short week. I do like the thinking behind that. Darwin, now good morning to you. You are Australia's most affordable property market at the moment. Domain's house price report is telling us that Darwin's median house price now sits at $651,000 and change. That is a 2.9% quarterly increase, the second highest growth rate among capital cities. Only Hobart outpaced Darwin with a 4.6% rise. And for buyers seeking a home under 700 grand, Darwin stands out as the last viable capital city option, offering affordability alongside its upward trajectory. So a lot of first-time home buyers are going to be moving to Darwin in 2025. Hey, coming up next, we are back into your summer series, travelling back to October once again from last year.
You're listening to the Summer Series on the Real Estate Podcast.
The good news for Jay and Louise is that while they've been waiting for the Sunshine Coast to cool down, Perth has become the second most expensive city in Australia to buy, and therefore their own home in Perth is now worth more. But yes, the answer to your question is you shouldn't really be waiting when you make a decision like that, because in reality, the property market rarely cools to the point where it becomes cheaper. And in fact, where the Sunshine Coast is concerned, a little bit of research would have been able to tell you that it was in a prime position to actually continue to increase in value, even if other property markets cooled. In real terms, property markets behave differently all over Australia. In the case of the Sunshine Coast, we were already seeing areas up and into Caboolture, which is about as far north as Brisbane itself goes before it starts to become the Sunshine Coast. We started to see those areas become overpopulated, very densely built, and we started to see property prices rising incredibly. That always pushes people further and further up into the north or the south, depending which way it's going. And in this case, we started to see people buying into the outskirts of the Sunshine Coast, and that started to bleed into the Sunshine Coast itself. So it was no surprise to me that the Sunshine Coast continued to grow at a pretty fast rate, because it was affordable at the time, and people were starting to see, well, the commute isn't that bad back into Brisbane. I think I'm going to move up into the Sunshine Coast. An opportunity missed by Jay and Louise, but one that they'll probably learn a great lesson from.
Yeah, for sure. Now, another talking point. This is really interesting. Recently, in fact, it was last month, we spoke to Mark McCrindle, who is a demographer. And I want to get your thoughts about this, because he was telling us about millennials wanting the trappings, the luxury, and the lifestyle that their parents have, but not down the track, but for their first home.
But yes, you are getting a generation that has a bit more of a focus on lifestyle, that probably aren't wanting to compromise as much. In fact, we found in our research that some of them expect to start their economic life in the manner in which they've seen their parents finish their economic life, in that nice house in the leafy suburb. And the only way that can, of course, occur in most circumstances is if the bank of mum and dad, or even the property of mum and dad, is somehow used to support that transition.
I'm just thinking for anybody, Margaret, that is older than the millennials, if they went to their parents and sort of asked them for property the same value of what mum and dad was living in, first off, probably the parents would say, stop it, you're living in the Matrix, wake up, and then be laughed out of the room.
Well, you can't blame the millennials because it's how they were raised. I think about my time when I was younger. I was raised with a sense that I lived in the place that I lived in because of all the hard work that my parents put in. And if I wanted to have that same lifestyle when I finally left my home and became an independent person, it was going to take me quite some time, and I was going to need to follow that same path as my parents did. But millennials have been raised by a generation of people who, for some reason, want to give them everything. So they grew up in the comfort and great lifestyle that their parents provided for them. Parents didn't withhold things the way my parents withheld things from me. Even when they could afford to give me a better lifestyle, they still made me work for every single thing that I ever got from them. And it meant that as an adult, I knew that I had to work for every single thing that I was going to get and start at the bottom of the rung. So you can't blame the millennials. It's not their fault. It's how they've been raised. They know nothing else. I think one of the things that millennials could take on board is that if they really want to be able to live the lifestyle that their parents have, then they might need to start on the property ladder, maybe even as an investor, buy some of those cheaper houses and units that they wouldn't want to live in themselves in states other than where they live, and gather up a number of properties that then grow in value and accelerate their own savings. If you're saving, but you've also got a property that's growing in value that a tenant's paying for, you're getting increased equity in that property as it grows, and that's dollars to you. And then eventually you can sell the lot.
All right, so you see what's happened there, parents of millennials. You have made yourself, it's a rod on your own back. This is the problem, giving the millennials everything that they want, you see, but you'll be paying for that down the track by the sound of it. All right, we are talking with Margaret Lomas. We'll come back after the break because we're going to talk about Melbourne and Adelaide next.
Why pay a premium for advertising that's too expensive? Our listeners are actively engaged in the real estate market. Get your message directly into the ears that can influence your business.
At the moment in particular, there's a really wide range between the top performers, Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, and those more subdued markets that you were talking about, Melbourne, Canberra, Darwin and Hobart, which each saw quarterly declines.
And the cost of building detached housing, so a house in Queensland, has gone up 38% over the last 3 years. Total construction is up around 30%. So that's the units, houses and the commercial buildings. So we're up a third. It has come back a little bit, but still significant price rises.
Funnily enough, I've recently started to see a lot of people move from New Zealand to Australia now, just because it's getting a little bit too expensive now.
However, it is at the tenant's home. And I think that, sending a gift at Christmas is a lovely idea with an attitude of respect towards those tenants and the fact that they are living in that home and it is their home. And I think that that's very important.
From powerful and up-to-date news to professional real estate experts with the latest property trends on the Real Estate Podcast.
And it is a Real Estate Monday today. Yeah, be nice to get this out nice and quickly and then slip into a Tuesday, Wednesday. If you are currently looking at buying, I think our next little bit of discussion with you, Margaret, will be of interest. CoreLogic, they brought out some numbers recently. Melbourne, 6th most expensive city in Australia. And look at that. Look at who is number 3. It is your perennial favourite, Adelaide.
It's not a shock to me, but I think it's a shock to many other people to find that Melbourne is so far down the list when typically we always saw Sydney and Melbourne at the top of the table and Adelaide and Perth really at the bottom of that table. Tasmania was for a long time, but came through with excessive growth in Hobart over a protracted period of time. So interestingly now, Perth is number 2 behind Sydney and Adelaide is number 3. But if we have a look at the reasons for that, it's no shock at all to me, and probably the reason why I did invest heavily in both of those areas. Both of those areas were incredibly affordable considering that they were a capital city. And when we talk in terms of what is a capital city is a place where people can live for generations and never feel the need to move anywhere else because everything they need is in that city. We saw both Adelaide and Perth have increasing infrastructure. Plenty of councils really focused on service provision for their ratepayers, including good schools, parks, services for seniors, services for people who aren't necessarily in employment. So because all of this was being built, it was like the foundation, or, when you see a multi-story building being built and you see lots of stuff happening under the ground first. They go many stories below the ground and it doesn't look like there's much of a building. And that happens for months, if not years, and suddenly the building goes up in record quick time. This is what's happened in Perth and Adelaide. They've been building those under the ground foundations for a long time. And during that time, housing was highly affordable. So people were able to enjoy a better lifestyle because they were all buying these fabulous houses that were something that you couldn't buy in other capital cities because it was too unaffordable elsewhere. Now we find a significant proportion of the population in both of those areas who are now have a fairly good wealth under them just through the home that they live in because their property prices have grown so rapidly. So you could see this happening many, many years ago. It's just that people ignore little capital cities like that, little capital cities that only have 1 million or so people. They ignore them, but you need to watch out for them.
Yes, and it's interesting because what I've noticed, especially over the last 2 or 3 months, from investors that live and operate in Perth, they are now looking into the Melbourne market. And to your point, of course, number 2, and you said it earlier, Jay and Louise who emailed in, the point there about them moving to the Sunshine Coast, a little piece of information, they said that they were increasing their mortgage a little bit. Not a lot, even though they sat on the fence. And it goes to your earlier point, the Perth property market has accelerated and they probably have yet to sell that property. So back to that point though, investors from Perth moving now into the Melbourne property market.
Yes, and one of the things that those investors need to be very careful about is that they make sure they're not buying in the areas that seem cheap at the moment, but still have plenty of options available for more development and more units, because every time more units get built, and this is part of Melbourne's problem, Melbourne had an oversupply in the pipeline of units, which has diluted the property market down now because we've got so many of those units. And when we're looking at median price, we take into account the value of all property in an area. So they have an oversupply of property. I caution investors anywhere, whether they're in Perth or Brisbane or wherever, who are considering investing in Melbourne, to ensure that they invest in areas that are already stressed in terms of supply, where there is population growth which is outstripping supply of housing, because they're the areas that are going to be growing in value even when Melbourne stays at the 6th most expensive city in Australia.
Fantastic, Margaret. So, as always, lots of information, and thanks again for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast this morning.
My absolute pleasure.
From powerful and up-to-date news to professional real estate experts with the latest property trends on the Real Estate Podcast. We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.